Welcome back, everybody, to Watcher of All Things. My name is Kiki, and this is my podcast where I talk movies, TV shows, and all things entertainment. And today, it's a very fun one. It is episode 59, Watchback, where we are going to be talking about Snowpiercer and Okja, Bong Joon-ho's two previous English films. I thought it'd just be a fun one to revisit those two before the highly anticipated Mickey 17 next week. We're going to get into it today. Lots to talk about. Before all that, I hope you are doing well. What a crazy week it has been. Weirdly enough, I worked the election polls this week, and that was kind of a psycho day. That was on Thursday, and it's Saturday morning, and I'm still recovering from that. But you know what? It was an interesting experience, and it was really fun to be a part of like democracy and everyone just exercising their right to vote. Moving on from that, we are 24 hours away from the Oscars tomorrow night. A few days ago on Wednesday, I posted my official 2025 Oscar hopes and predictions on my YouTube channel right here if you're listening on my YouTube channel. So go check that out. Really fun video to make. I put a lot of work into it and I'm very happy with it. It was just, I love editing and I love video editing. So it was an absolute blast for me and just to have fun with it. Put some memes in, put some jokes, goof around. It was hard to make my predictions and my choices. Whatever, you just got to take a shot in the dark. So we are going to be talking all things Snowpiercer and Okja. Before all that, however, timestamps below. I know both these movies are a few years old and lots of people have seen them, but if you don't want the spoiler section and you just want the non-spoiler section, that is absolutely fine. Everything is marked underneath in the description. But before we get to Snowpiercer and Okja, let's get into the news. All right, well, kind of a crazy news week, and oddly enough, most of the news was coming out on Thursday while I was working the election polls. But let's start with Deadline putting out a story that Ayo Edebiri is being tapped to write the live-action Barney movie for Mattel with A24, produced by Daniel Kaluuya, and she is also in talks to star in the film. So I think this has actually been in development for a while. A few years ago, or a couple years ago, at least a couple years ago, I remember before Barbie, Mattel put out a list of all the movies that they were developing with their toy brands or their show brands or whatever, and Daniel Kaluuya was tapped to produce the film with 59% Productions, his company. As Deadline says, first announced in 2019, the film's plot is being kept under wraps. Kevin McKeown and Andrew Scannell are overseeing 4 Mattel films, with Robbie Brenner producing for Mattel along with A24 as well as Kaluuya and Rowan Riley. So it's interesting, it's been 6 years in the making. I guess it just hasn't gotten off the ground, but also there was COVID and there was the writer's strike, so every project that was like 2019 announced was delayed somehow. But it sounds interesting. Like, weirdly enough, I was a huge Barney fan as a kid. I used to watch it on TV. Is that just a Canadian and American thing, or in Europe and like Australia, did you guys have Barney the dinosaur in the morning? I don't know. I'm curious what were like English television shows that children would watch overseas. There was some kind of story or rumor that Barney had sworn and that's why the show was canceled or something like that. I don't know, but it's a dinosaur, so you could just replace the actor or something like that. But Ayo Edebiri, I love her. I know she has a new film coming out, Opus, that is just getting bombarded with bad reviews, and apparently it is terrible. I'm still probably going to go see it because I am curious, and I like seeing her branch out, just away from the bear as well. She's done plenty of stuff. It's cool to see her outside of the bear because she is a very talented actress. Like I said, maybe a couple weeks ago, I loved Bottoms. I thought that was such a funny movie, and I recommend it to anyone that's looking for a new comedy. But let's move into another story. So the fallout after the James Bond news last week, there's so many pieces of new information coming out about who was tapped to direct, who is, going to star in the potential new films, and sort of how the relationship kept fracturing and coming apart, leading to the decision. So Variety put out a kind of summary piece this week. James Bond's road to Amazon, Barbara Broccoli's tight control, snubbing Christopher Nolan, and more. So let's start with the Barbara Broccoli aspect. So Barbara Broccoli and Wilson were resistant to the idea for years of fully exploiting the property, didn't see eye to eye with each other, according to insiders, but their move to limit the exposure of the man with a license to kill may have proved prudent, considering that the ubiquity of Uber brands like Disney's Marvel and Lucasfilm sparked audience fatigue and prompted a pullback on output. A lot of people have sort of agreed that Broccoli and everyone involved with Bond has done really well to not allow spin-off shows, spin-off spin-off movies because we just don't need it. There's 1,000 spy shows and movies. Like, this is a very realistic, I don't know, movie franchise where it's like, yeah, there's probably spies in the world with stuff going on in military action. Like, it's not that far reaching. There's no point in a spin-off series for these characters because there's 100 other characters in the world that could just be that spy series, and you don't really need James Bond. And I also don't know how many people would watch a spin-off series without James Bond in it. I think it's a little different when it comes to different franchises because, you know, like with the Batman series, just for instance, where we have the Penguin show that came out, everyone saw that as sort of a bridge between the Batman Part 1 and Part 2, but also there's been just villain stuff before with the comic books, like focusing on villains and side characters. That's a very natural thing in the comic book world where we've never had side character stories in the Bond universe, so I think it's probably smart that they just stayed on track and said, no, we're going to keep it to the films. Well, some say Broccoli was too cautious and exerted outsized control to the detriment of Bond. Sources say Christopher Nolan expressed interest in directing a Bond movie following the release of Tenet, but Broccoli made clear that no director would have final cut while Bond was under her purview. Nolan, a final cut director, wound up making Oppenheimer as his follow-up to Tenet, with that film earning nearly $1 billion at the global box office and winning the Best Picture Oscar. And decades earlier, Steven Spielberg wanted to make a Bond movie following Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but was blocked by Broccoli's father, the late Albert Cubby Broccoli, because he was too inexperienced. So, you know, that's not a first-time thing where a big director approaches the series and says, hey, I want to do this and I think I could do it. And they're like, okay, but it's fully under our control. Like, no, people would kill for a Christopher Nolan James Bond film. Like, he made 3 really good Batman films. As much as some people don't like The Dark Knight Rises, I still think it's a good movie. So bringing him into a more grounded world with James Bond where it can be a little bit simple would be insane. And a Steven Spielberg James Bond movie would probably be very cool as well. Like, he's, you know, done Indiana Jones. So I don't know. It is interesting, all this news coming to light. And I think a lot of people were like, oh, well, Barbara Broccoli is, you know, the hero in the story. But she, you know, she has made mistakes with the Bond IP. I think not letting Christopher Nolan, him approaching you saying, hi, I am Christopher Nolan, multiple time Oscar nominee. I'd like to make a James Bond movie. And I revitalized another franchise known as Batman in, you know, the early 2000s after a few dud movies. I think that's just like a golden opportunity. It is disappointing to hear because I think a Christopher Nolan James Bond movie has the potential to be amazing. But let's move into another story from this week. We got our first image from Lanterns showing Kyle Chandler and Aaron Pierre as Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. Very simple image. I mean, some people were like, oh, what a weird photo to put out. Why? It's literally giving the most true detective or cop vibes on Earth, and they're both wearing Green Lantern rings. Like, that's what the show is going to be. And we also have an official description of the show from Vanity Fair. HBO's Lanterns, now in production, embraces everything high concept about genie-esque space cops while being rooted in the earthiest of TV genres, the prestige pulp detective show. Kyle Chandler plays Hal Jordan, a seasoned Lantern approaching retirement, and Aaron Pierre plays Jon Stewart, the trainee who will replace him. Together, they investigate a murder in Nebraska, which leads them to still darker mysteries as well as reckonings. I am so beyond excited for this. The showrunner and one of the writers, Chris Mundy, did Ozark, a show that I loved so much. I think concept-wise, it sounds really great. It looks like Nebraska, it's going to be a fun little remote murder mystery that's going to be really good, and I like the 2 leads a lot. I'm a big Kyle Chandler fan, but also I'm a massive Aaron Pierre fan after Rebel Ridge. I think he is such a good action star, and if that was, you know, a taste of bigger things to come from a Netflix original, I think he can be a fantastic Jon Stewart. He also just looks the part. They both do. They both look great. Like, people were complaining, oh, Kyle Chandler, he's going to be out of shape and too old, and he looks like a comic book seasoned Hal Jordan, exactly how he would be. So I'm pumped for this. I like the simplicity of the ring as well because they put out an image of Hal Jordan's Green Lantern ring. It's a nice gold color with just a little green rock in the middle. It doesn't need to be some big plastic looking Green Lantern symbol, but also I saw a funny tweet that was like, we need lanterns to be good so Ryan Reynolds can finally shut up about Green Lantern, and I couldn't agree more. Like, it's time to let it go, Ryan, and this looks promising. I think everything that they're sharing about the show sounds intriguing. It sounds like a lot of fun. I saw one storyline or one quote from, I think someone was interviewed. Wait, was it Damon Lindelof? I think he's part of the show as well. They said that there are going to be ties to kind of the Superman movie or Peacemaker or whatever, that, you know, it's not going to be massive things that are going to be distracting, that like, oh, I didn't see the the other things, so how can I enjoy this? It's just going to be like little hints at other films or TV shows, which I think is a smart move to make. You don't want to get too stuck in the weeds when it comes to links between your projects. But let's move into another story. I'm very excited for Lanterns, but I'm also surprisingly excited for this, and this got a lot of hate, but bear with me as I go through this. Shrek 5. We got our first clip / teaser little thing this week. They've redone the animation. They've changed it to the Puss in Boots style and have announced that Zendaya is to star in Shrek 5 as Shrek's daughter. Look, a lot of people were freaking out on the internet of like, oh my god, they've given Shrek the substance, or they've changed the animation style, and it's like, oh, it's going to be woke now. It's like, what does any of that mean? And second of all, Puss in Boots came out 2 years ago, and people loved that movie, even though it had completely different animation style, and that's just the style they're going with here. In my opinion, this looks really fun, and I'm excited for it. Zendaya joining the cast is really cool and can bring in kind of the next generation of kids to a fun thing. And I saw one really brain-rotted tweet that was like, oh, I hope they don't just make it like pop culture references or just referencing larger culture in general. Have you watched any of the Shrek movies? In Far, Far Away, he's literally escaping on Donkey, who is now a white Ford Bronco, or a white Bronco, sorry. It's an O.J. Simpson, and they do like Mission Impossible, and they do tons of references throughout the entire Shrek series. Like, I just don't understand. People just want to complain and make like hate out of a situation instead of just taking, the fun road and being like, okay, it looks promising. Like, it's a 30-second, 40-second clip, something like that. I thought it actually looked really fun. I'm excited. I was a huge Shrek fan as a kid. Oh my god. Shrek 1 and 2, still to this day, I'm a massive Shrek fan. I think Shrek 1 is one of the just funniest movies to me in general, has an amazing story. Shrek 2, Far, Far Away, fantastic. I've watched the Far, Far Away Idol post-credit and menu thing 1,000 times as a kid. Like, Shrek 1 and 2 are just revolutionary, and they've still stuck with our generations as we've gotten older. It's wonderful. So I'm really excited for this. I like all the updated animation and the looks of the characters. Been how many years since the last one? You may as well just revolutionize or change it a little bit. I don't think it's anything to really freak out over. Something to freak out over would be a complete reboot. But anyways, let's move on to lots of reports over the past week have been saying that Kathleen Kennedy is allegedly going to retire at the end of the year from Star Wars and Lucasfilm Pictures. Deadline, Mike Fleming Jr. reported, in a piranha-like frenzy on Kathleen Kennedy, Matt Belloni's Puck report said that Disney was putting her out to pasture and she would be retiring at the end of the year. So the Deadline article does highlight that Matt Belloni has kind of been out to get Kathleen Kennedy for multiple years, just constantly doing like hit pieces on her and negative coverage, when this is not at all the case. And Kathleen Kennedy even addressed the rumors this week because it was kind of going wild for a few days, and people were then starting to jump on Dave Filoni and be like, oh my god, he's going to be a terrible successor. And then it was kind of shifting on to Kevin Feige as well, saying, oh, well, Kevin Feige's going to take over, he's going to leave Marvel. Turns out none of it was true. Kathleen Kennedy said, the truth is, and I want to say loud and clear, I am not retiring. I will never retire from movies. I will die making movies. That is the first thing that's important to say. What's happening at Lucasfilm is I have been talking for quite some time with both Bob and Alan about what eventual succession might look like. We have an amazing bench of people here, and we have every intention of making an announcement months or years down the road. We are in lockstep as to what that's going to be, and I am continuing. I'm producing the Mandalorian movie right now, and I'm also producing Sean Levy's movie, which is after that. So I'm continuing to stay at Lucasfilm and looking very thoughtfully, Bob and Alan, as to who's stepping in. Oh yeah, also some news came out about Sean Levy's Star Wars movie. So apparently it's set 5 to 6 years after The Rise of Skywalker. It stars Ryan Gosling, but honestly, I love Ryan Gosling, but this sounds like a terrible idea for a Star Wars movie, and I think Sean Levy is not the guy for Star Wars. He doesn't really have the story elements. Like, Deadpool and Wolverine was fun, and I hate that every day I'm starting to agree more and more with Marty Scorsese that the Marvel movies are like amusement park rides. You ride it once, and then once you've experienced it, you kind of want to move on because it's nothing that you can do over and over again, and it's going to present something new or change anything. Specifically, I'm talking about stuff after Endgame. I think the stuff before Endgame you can really enjoy over and over again, but a lot of the post-Endgame stuff I watched once, and I have no desire to go back other than Guardians 3, but I would say that's probably it. But as for Star Wars as well, I think they've just really sort of mismanaged things for a long time now with the sequel trilogy of just easily firing directors and listening to fans a little bit too much. People want the change for Star Star Wars, but then when someone comes and does something different, people outcry and say, oh, I hate it, blah, 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 blah. The bottom line is Kathleen Kennedy is not retiring. So let's get it quickly into our final news story, which just happened this morning. I'm not going to say what everything is or send any links or drop any links or tell you where you can find these things. But this morning, Avengers Doomsday leaked concept arts and the Fantastic Four First Steps concept arts were all posted online and leaked by, I think, the Fantastic Four artist who did the concept art for that film. And they accidentally put the Doomsday concept art in the same folder. It is now all being deleted. Marvel is cracking down on it. All I'm going to say is everything looked extremely cool and it all got me very excited. Like, oh, damn, this is actually some good ideas and this is fun. So I'm a little optimistic for Avengers, Doomsday, and Secret Wars, which, as you know, last week I said, I think those movies are going to be terrible. But having seen the concept art, I'm like, okay, maybe they got some ideas here. This might be working, but we shall see. That's all I'm going to say about that, though, because I don't want to get, wow, I just did a Forrest Gump quote by accident. But anyways, I don't want to get any copyright strikes or anything like that. I'm not telling anyone where to go find it. I'm just saying what happened on the internet where things dropped and were quickly taken down. But timestamps below, we are going to get into our watch back for Snowpiercer and Okja. Let's do it. All right, we are going to kick it off with Snowpiercer, a 2013 action sci-fi film coming in at 2 hours, 6 minutes. Google's in a nutshell, which we haven't had in a nutshell in a few weeks, is contemplative, harsh, and thrilling, as well as reviews. 83% loved the acting. It is directed by Bong Joon-ho and written by Bong Joon-ho and Kelly Masterson with a budget of $40 million. Reviews largely positive, 7.1 on IMDb, 94% on Rotten Tomatoes with a 72% audience score, 84% on Metacritic, a 3.7 average on Letterboxd with the mode rating being 4 stars. The synopsis for Snowpiercer. In a future where a failed global warming experiment kills off most life on the planet, a class system evolves aboard the Snowpiercer, a train that travels around the globe via a perpetual motion engine. The film stars Chris Evans as Curtis Everett, Song Kang-ho as Namgung Min-soo, John Hurt as Gilliam, Tilda Swinton as Minister Mason, Jamie Bell as Edgar, Octavia Spencer's Tanya, Ed Harris as Minister Wilford, Ewan Bremner as Andrew, Koei Sung as Yona, and a bunch of other really great supporting characters. All right, let's jump into Snowpiercer. My initial thoughts, this is my second time watching this, probably since 2018, I would say, and I really enjoyed it. Oh my god, it was so much better than I remember. I mean, from the concept of the story to performances to production design, there's just so much to enjoy here, and obviously we're covering 2 films today, so we're not going to go super in-depth for like 40 minutes non-spoilers, but I have a lot to say in spoilers as well because I think the third act is just so jam-packed. So the background of the story, Snowpiercer is based on the French climate fiction graphic novel Le Transpersonnage by Jacques Loeb, Benjamin Legrand, and Jean-Marc Rochette. Wow, that was my French immersion skills coming through. In the winter of 2005, Bong Joon-ho found Jean-Marc Rochette's French graphic novel series at a comic book shop near Hongik University and finished reading the entire series while standing in front of the bookshelf where he found it. He was fascinated by the idea of people struggling on the train for survival and how every section is classified in social stratification. Bong showed the series to his friends, fellow director Park Chan-wook and producer Lee Tae-hun, who loved it as well. Although Bong praised the original graphic novel, he soon realized that a film like Snowpiercer needed an original take. He stated, "I had to come up with a completely new story and new characters in order to create a new dynamic Snowpiercer that was packed with cinematic exhilaration." So interesting development. It is an English film. It's 85% English, I believe. But let's get into the performances. Chris Evans, of course, as Curtis Everett. Watching the Captain America movies and then Snowpiercer, I miss that guy. Like, remember when he used to actually care about acting? And he is so amazing in this. He's just worn down as Curtis, like no glimmer in his eye, no hope in this story, zero happiness, nothing to give at the start. All he has is revolution and hatred for the establishment, and he's such a perfect lead for this film. I loved him as Curtis. Gives an outstanding performance. Same with Song Kang-ho, I think I'm saying that right, as Namgung. Really great as well. He's in Parasite. I loved that film. Plays a really dopey drug user in this who is much more than meets the eye. Then we have John Hurt as Gilliam. I love a good John Hurt role, and he plays a really worn down leader, and he's trying to move his legacy onto Curtis, which is a very fascinating dynamic that I think works just really well throughout the film. Another strong performance, Tilda Swinton as Minister Mason. She's great. great. Like, I love a good pair of fake teeth on Tilda Swinton, and as we'll talk about at Okja, Bong Joon-ho loves giving her some fake teeth, and it looks like Mickey 17 has some really great dentures on other actors as well. And the rest of the supporting characters, like Jamie Bell as Edgar, he's really good. Octavia Spencer's Tanya, Ed Harris as Minister Wilford, Koa Sung as Yona. Like, everyone is just really good in the story. Everyone is so perfectly mixed together. Our cast just has phenomenal chemistry, and the dynamics all bounce off each other really well. And I do really like the different casts of every Bong Joon-ho film. Like, it feels like he changes it. There's only like one same actor. I think Tilda Swinton's the only one that's in Snowpiercer and Okja. And then Parasite, obviously, pretty much a completely different cast other than the lead. And Mickey 17 is a largely different cast as well. So I just love how much he sort of changes it every film. He's like Christopher Nolan. It's a mostly different cast for all of his films. But this story of Snowpiercer, I really love the story. Like, look, I am a sucker for world has ended stories and apocalypse stuff, especially stories like this where humanity is on a ship, on a train, on a bus, or whatever it is. Not only do I love the train aspect of this, like, I love a global train that just goes in a loop, but I think the whole ending or trying to end global warming with CW7 is really interesting. Like, you know, billionaires think there's this massive solution that we can do and it ends up ruining the earth. I really loved all that, and I think the start of the film establishes everything really well. Obviously, Bong Joon-ho loves telling stories about class inequality, and I really love everything about the larger metaphor here really worked for me. The world is literally a train where each cart represents a level of class, like he said, why he liked the story in the first place, and it's very easy to understand as well. Like, I think anybody can enjoy this film because it is just so easily digestible, and yet it's telling so many big ideas to you and sharing so many interesting questions and ideas about class that I really loved. And that's what I love about Bong Joon-ho's films is I've seen 3 of his movies, and all 3 of them, another one we're going to talk about today, I just love the ideas he's trying to present, and every film just has such a strong argument behind it. But also just directing wise, Bong Joon-ho, the movie is so damn entertaining and so well directed. It has really, really cool action, really emotionally charged scenes, and shows a lot of interesting apocalypse devices as well, and how interesting ideas of how civilization could live on the trains. And I would assume a lot of that does come from the graphic novels, but it feels translated to screen very well. You know, like Dune and Denis Villeneuve, there's a lot of strange stuff in those books that it's like, how the hell are we going to do it in live action? And they're translated very well. And same with this, like sci-fi elements that just don't look goofy or over the top and are all just really fun in this different aesthetic. Writing wise, I think it is a mostly well-written film, but it does sort of lose itself a little bit in the third act, I would say. Like, the wheels almost, no pun intended, the wheels almost come off a little bit, and it feels like there's just a lot trying to be dumped at the last minute. But overall, I do love the writing of the story and the character arcs, and I think the emotional beats happen at the right times. But I think there's a little bit too much dumping in the final third of this film for it to really be a smooth landing or the train to fully make it through the tunnel. I don't know, you can make a million train metaphors if you guys would like, but I mean, pacing wise, even if it is a little bit info heavy at the end, pacing wise, the movie flies by. Like, it's 2 hours, 6 minutes, but I would say it all works. You're entertained the whole time, even if at the end you're like, oh, okay, a little bit too much there, but it's still, I'm never bored. I do want to talk about the CGI though, because some of the CGI is quite interesting in this. Like, it's a little plasticky or shiny, and there's weird lighting in certain elements, but it's not so bad that I think it brings the movie down at all. It's whatever. It's 2013. The movie's now 12 years old, so it's, you know, the CGI is very different, and it's a $40 million movie. Not that that's a small budget, but it's a good budget. But there are a lot of scenes that show outside of the train, of course, when they're going through cities, or they're showing, you know, people that have tried to escape and have frozen to death outside or whatever. And a lot of it is really cool, and there's a lot of really striking images in here of the outside world. Like, they're going through one city, and I won't mention any specifics or spoilers with our characters of who's even saying this, but they're going through one city, and you can see there's a train station that they're going through, and there's a busted down door and window where a bunch of frozen bodies were all trying to get in and clearly get on a train to get away, but they all froze there in place. So it's just a lot of interesting things outside of the train, but also a lot of interesting CGI inside of the train that some of it works, some of it doesn't. I do want to touch on the dialogue because it is his first English film, and of course an English speaker rewrote the story with him, but still 85% English with the rest in Korean. His first English film, and I do think some of the dialogue is very stiff and feels a little bit Duolingo or translator where the emotions or the emphasis is kind of wrong in some sentences or is said as formally as possible. Does that make sense? I feel like that makes sense. But like Duolingo, you learn French, you learn Spanish, you learn whatever. And it's like nobody really talks like that in real life, and the inflections are all very robotic. There is a few moments in this film where I was like, oh, this English just sounds really strange. But when we get into Okja, I'll talk about maybe the evolution of Bong Joon-ho's English directing as well. But this is, for a first English film, it's amazing. Like, I couldn't imagine trying to direct in French, or I speak a little bit of Croatian. I would fail miserably directing in another language. So it's miraculous. I know he's learned English over the years, and now I think he's fluent in English. But, just for his first movie, you can tell there's some parts where it's like, I think an English first director would probably do that scene a little bit different or add inflection in different parts, and maybe the actors didn't think to be like, oh, well, I would say it this way, but whatever. I think it is just very noticeable in some parts, but it's still really great for a director's first English film. And speaking of languages, actually, it is a little bit of a nitpick, but they use these translators in the film that help the Korean and English characters understand each other, and I think there's a little bit of continuity error there. They have translating devices, they're talking to each other. Sometimes they use it to understand each other, but then other times the translation devices are nowhere to be seen, or they'll use it for the first 3 lines of the scene and then they're not used anymore, or we don't hear the translation anymore. I don't know. Maybe it's just to show that they're using it and then the rest of the scene, they don't play it in the audio, but it's like, I think there needed to be a little bit more continuity there. I don't know. That was just something that sort of was a little bit of a nitpick. Like, wait, how are they understanding each other right now? And also the timing of the translators in the monologues. Like, the translators, there's no way they would know that they're done speaking when they'll take a huge pause in their monologue and keep going. The translator would have cut in that pause because it would think you're done speaking. I don't know if there was a button they were clicking of like translate now and play out loud, but it doesn't all quite fit together for me. But I really loved the invention and concepts of each cart. It genuinely felt like the movie just keeps getting exciting as we move up throughout the carts and new things are being presented, discovering something new every 5 minutes in the movie. And I just love the revolution pushing forward. But also the audience, we're not only getting the background and history of our characters, but new fun sci-fi action set pieces. Like, there's a night vision set piece that is just so good in this story that I loved so much. Look, overall, I'm going to hop into spoilers here because there's just so many spoilers to discuss in this, given the third act. So I just want to say overall, before I get into that, there's a lot to pick apart here, and the material is just so rich with thought and questions. I really loved Snowpiercer, even if I think it's flawed. It's such an enjoyable film that's really up my alley because I love apocalyptic, class struggles in the apocalypse and humanity trying to move on from the apocalypse. I love stories like that, so this was very much my niche. It's such a solid 4 out of 5 stars for me, but let's move into spoilers. All right, the many revelations of the third act. Let's jump into it. So pretty much everything's a sham. As much as I loved hearing all of the backstory and the explanation of how everything is a lie, I think all at once it can be a little bit overbearing, or it just like is changing the foundation of everything we know in the film so far. But let's break it down by some spoilers. I think Curtis's backstory and his hero arc really works for this movie. And I think Chris Evans sells the hell out of it. And his combination of his acting with Bong Joon-ho's directing and the writing is just so good. So, of course, like the world ended, everyone got on the train, and in the early days, they resorted to cannibalism. And it's just so devastating how Curtis breaks that down. And he does reveal that Curtis actually killed Edgar's mom and was going to eat Edgar because he was a child and they were doing cannibalism. But Gilliam cut off his arm instead and offered it to save Edgar's life. And one of the particularly heartbreaking lines that Curtis says is, "I hate that I know what humans taste like, especially babies, and how bad they taste." So fucked up and so strange to hear out loud, but it's so devastating. But I think Chris Evans really revealing the truth of his life on this train, because he's had equal amount of years on the train and off the train, whereas Edgar, who is like his right-hand man, grew up on the train. The train has worn him down, and it really sets the tone of his attitude at the start of the film, and the more you learn about him, like the worse it is, and it really sets him up to be our redemption guy and our hero, and him sacrificing sacrificing himself at the end just works so well. Losing his arm to save Timmy from the engine was a really great hero moment, just like Gilliam, who he wanted to be like Gilliam and take over for him and be a leader. He's now sacrificed his arm and kind of it's gone on, and he says in the story even to Gilliam that he would do the same thing and sacrifice his arm, and it's almost like Gilliam is telling him one day you'll have the opportunity, and that day is literally today at the end of the film. And he almost gives in to Wilford, the leader of the train and the inventor. At the end, it's like he's going to say yes, and even the most courageous and bravest guy on the train, even he's a little bit tempted by power. And Curtis's arc, you're rooting for him the whole time, and it's like, yeah, take down the system and create this equal system where all of the carts can live freely, and who knows, maybe we can even leave the train. But it turns out that Gilliam is actually working with the front car and Wilford, and that was just such a heartbreaking revelation that the messages were coming from Wilford himself to Gilliam, and they were writing to each other, setting up this whole revolution, because then it flips our entire story on itself, that this is not a revolution, this is all pre-planned, and it's just trying to control the population. That was my favorite element of the third act by far, that this whole thing has been a sham. And this isn't quite a third act revelation, but I loved the fact that they're slowly hinting the world is actually getting warmer and people can survive outside of the train, because once the front cart loses power, like Minister Mason and Wilford, they're just another leader in the world, and humanity can survive outside of the train. So what's the point of the train? And they lose that power. So I loved Namgung, that he's been every year when they cross this bridge at New Year's, he looks down at this plane crash, and the plane, before it was just the tail showing, but now it's slowly being more and more of the plane uncovered by snow. So the earth is getting warmer, and you can track that. I thought that was just such a fun revelation, that he, in the middle of this big like action sequence or something, he just runs over to the window. He's like, look at the plane at the bottom of the bridge. And we're wondering, why are we looking at this plane? But it's such a cool revelation, and I think it really just sets up the whole metaphor of the film itself. Not only are the front and back car working together, like you can insert an agent of power, or you can give someone that's, in the poorer class, you can give them responsibilities and make them feel important, and they will help you keep order because they have power. They would rather have power themselves, or the corruptible to have power themselves, and they'll help, maintain the rest of the lower class and keep things as they are, in equal as possible. But not only are the front and back car working together, life never even went extinct outside of the train. So this whole thing was a sham. Like, it's just the polar bear surviving was just such a good moment of like, oh shit, no, this whole thing's a lie and you can survive outside. Then what are all these frozen bodies everywhere? Is it just the fact that they have been outside, uncovered in the cold, or what happened? And it couldn't have just been in the last few years that life came back, because where would the bear come from? It had to be continually living, and it would have been a cub, and that just was a insane revelation. And they've only used this to control the population and bring us all down as humans. I just thought that was such a fun story element that really blows your mind and makes the third act work a little bit better than it should have. If you're going to have all that info dumping in the third act, I think it's a dangerous game, and it doesn't all work here. And the third act as well, I think a lot of the action really works, even if, some of the story beats feel a little bit rushed or forced or just all coming to you at once. The action's really good with the explosion, all the fighting, and like going through the nightclub train cars or whatever, where people are all doing the Chronos drugs and stuff like that. And I also think just the revelation that the two Chronos addicts aren't even drug addicts, they were just collecting it all to make explosives, is interesting. And that's why I think it's a good performance from Song Kang-ho, because he's playing, more than meets the eye, and he's tricked Curtis this entire time that he wants to blow the gate, and he's the gate guy. But overall, I think that's all I got for spoilers. Like, action-wise, everything works, every story beat, every death. I mean, Edgar dying by that big guy in the gray suit who is so awesome in all the action, is just this like brute force dude. Of actually, one action sequence I'll talk about quickly that I thought worked really well was them shooting at each other, Curtis and the big guy, Mr. Gray or whatever, Franco the Elder. Chris Evans as Curtis and Franco the Elder shooting at each other like 5 cars away, but they're on this massive turned bridge, and they're just like trying to pretty much snipe each other from across this bridge. Was really cool and inventive. Just a lot of fun. I don't know if that's in the graphic novel or Bong Joon-ho thought of that, but it's just such a cool action set piece, and they're slowly catching up to each other. I mean, really, this is a chase movie in some ways. It's like it becomes a rebellion film, then it's about a chase film, and I just loved it, and overthrowing everything, and everybody kind of dies in the end, and that sucks. But I think that's going to do it for the spoiler section of Snowpiercer. Yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. I liked it a lot. I would recommend it, but let's move into Okja. Okja is a 2017 action-adventure film coming in at exactly 2 hours. The film is directed by Bong Joon-ho, written by Bong Joon-ho and John Ronson, with a budget of $50 million. Reviews, 7.3 on IMDb, with 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an 81% audience score. Average Letterboxd rating, 3.7, with 4 stars being the mode. Google's in a nutshell has it as exciting, thought-provoking, and moving. The synopsis for Okja. A young girl named Mija risks everything to prevent a powerful multinational company from kidnapping her best friend, a massive animal named Okja. The film stars Ahn Seo-hyun as Mija, Tilda Swinton as Lucy Miranda / Nancy Miranda, Paul Dano as Jay, Jake Gyllenhaal as Dr. Johnny Wilcox, Lily Collins as Red, Steven Yeun as Kay, Giancarlo Esposito as Frank Dawson, Devin Bostick as Silver, and Byun Hee Bong as Joo Hee Bong, with a boatload of other fun supporting characters. But let's talk Okja. Okay, initial thoughts. This was a first-time watch for me, and I really enjoyed this. It was heartfelt, it's devastating in some parts, but it's just really moving and an entertaining watch. Do I prefer this or Snowpiercer? I'll answer that at the end of the non-spoiler section for Okja, but the development of this story in 2015, it was announced that his next film would feature a South Korean female lead and an English-speaking supporting cast filming in New York City. It was then picked up by Netflix and Plan B Entertainment with a budget of $50 million, production starting in late 2016 for a release of 2017. Let's start with the performances, of course, for Okja. Ahn Seo-hyun as Mija, so good. She does it all. She's funny, daring, emotional, shy, nails it with the action. It's amazing how well she's leading this film. And then you have Tilda Swinton as Lucy and Nancy. She's a lot of fun. Again, I love when Bong Joon-ho just gives her some silly dentures to enjoy. Paul Dano, I had no clue he was in this movie, but he plays Jay. I think he's a really critical point of the story. He brings a lot of comfort and tries to let Mija lead in some ways. Then we have Jake Gyllenhaal as Dr. Johnny Wilcox. He's like psycho in this. He is a washed up TV animal guy, and he really lets himself get goofy in this, which I enjoyed a lot. Then some supporting characters. Lily Collins as Red, Steven Yeun as Kay, Giancarlo Esposito as Frank Dawson, all do really well and just play their parts very well. I enjoyed them all being self-contained, and I remember when Giancarlo Esposito actually got to play fun characters instead of just brooding evil guy like Gustavo Fring in every action film now. So this was really refreshing, and the story itself, it's an emotional roller coaster. Like I said, it has humor, it has a lot of darkness to it, but it really does have heart, and that's what I took away from it. It's a very wholesome and heartfelt story. The world is actually built so well, and everything is so well established in the first, I'd say 40 minutes. I mean, from the opening scene, you fully explain what this movie is going to be, and it's great that they're going to do these experiments to try and bring sustainable eating to everyone. But weirdly enough, the first 40 minutes we're with Okja and Mija, it gave me the same feeling as Hunt for the Wilder People, a movie that I hold so dearly to my heart. I love Hunt for the Wilder People. I used to watch it every year before going back to university. It's just as loving, provides just as much comfort and, living in the wild away from the craziness of life with a loved one. I really loved it. And then it's a fish out of water adventure story after that, trying to expose this truth and save a friend. Also, Mija's parents are dead, which is a lot like Ricky Baker's parents, who aren't around. I can't remember if they're dead, Ricky's parents, but they're not around. So I think being such a fan of Hunt for the Wilder People really sold me on Okja in the first half hour to 40 minutes. Directing wise, let's get back to Bong Joon-ho, because I think watching Snowpiercer and then watching this, having loved Parasite as well, and then seeing the trailer for Mickey 17, it's amazing how well he bounces back and flows between comedy and drama. In every interview, he seems like such a funny guy, but he is so intelligent, and the fact that he can just do action, comedy, drama, romance, he can kind of do all of it so well was really fantastic, and he is kind of a Swiss Army knife of directors. But like Snowpiercer, I really appreciate the messaging and the metaphor of the story. And we talked about it with Snowpiercer, but dialogue and writing wise, I think this movie, dialogue wise, is a huge improvement from Snowpiercer. All of the English is way sharper and way more natural. And I'm not sure what changed in the years since Snowpiercer, but I don't know, maybe he learned English, because as far as I know, he speaks English well and he's fluent, but he just likes to use an interpreter in all of his interviews so he can be more clear and get his point across in his own language, which I think is a really good idea, because it's hard enough doing interviews in your own language where words can be misconstrued. So it's a great idea that if if you're not speaking in your first language, you know, maybe use an interpreter because they can help you even more. So I think, yeah, dialogue-wise, a lot better in this film. Writing-wise, it's an English mostly film. If you Google Bong Joon-ho English films, this one comes up and Snowpiercer comes up. But also, I really liked the mixing of languages here. It's uniting people of different countries against a big corporation. It's like Snowpiercer, but also like Snowpiercer, it's about the fakeness of leadership and the showmanship of corporate responsibility. And corporate responsibility is a very new idea. That is very much like the last 30 years. I took in my 4th year of university, one of my specialization courses in history was, I think we were talking about environment and economy, like the history of that. And we spoke about corporate responsibility for multiple weeks. It's only really now that most companies are being public with their environmental waste or whatever and things like that and trying to be responsible for the earth. Like that was, 80 years ago, it was not like that. They were dumping what they needed to dump and they didn't care about environmental repercussions. Then you have like the hippie movement, how they actually called out all of the environmental damages, but it was a very hippie thing to call out the environment. So it is interesting that this is a story about environmental and corporate responsibility in our new world, and specifically with like a meat take on it, of talking about, vegans and vegetarian and consumption of meat and slaughterhouses and how that can have environmental repercussions like it does. But now let's get into some more technical stuff. Like I do want to talk about the CGI. Mostly works really well here. I liked it a lot. There's only like a couple of moments where the lighting on Okja seems a little bit off, but like the interactions between our characters and the animals always worked for me in this. And it's actually funny watching this after having watched Pirates 2 a couple weeks ago, or the last week, where the CGI, yes, it looks great in Dead Man's Chest as Pirates 2, but there are a few moments where the eye lines are completely wrong between our human actors and the CGI characters in Pirates 2. Whereas here, all the eye lines are great, and sometimes the CGI can be flat in Pirates where it just looks like a flat computer thing behind them, but I think the textures work really well here for the most part. So it is interesting, the revolution of CGI, or the evolution of it rather. Now I do want to get into the pacing and structure here, because I think Okja pacing wise is a little bit more rough. There's a stretch of the film leading into the third act that I think doesn't quite work, and it feels like we're sort of losing what made the first half of the film so nice, and heartfelt. It just kind of feels like we're running around and following these characters and not many solid emotional beats are happening or being presented, and it's a little bit jumpy tone-wise, or who the focus of our characters are. It's a little hard to get our footing for about 30 minutes of this movie leading into the last act, but it's still, okay. It's just there's some dragging of our feet and some continuity stuff, just like in Snowpiercer. There's an issue where Steven Yeun is the only character that speaks Korean to Mija, and he has to translate, and that's a lot of the story. But there are parts where towards the end of the film he's translating a conversation, and like the translator devices in Snowpiercer, there's a huge monologue and then he says 2 words and it's like, yep, that's it. But also parts where he's just not translating anything and they understand each other, and she maybe learns some English at one point of the story, but it's just a little bit messy continuity wise when it comes to languages. So I think that is one thing that needs to be worked out in his films. And I mean, it's been almost 8 years now since Okja came out, so maybe he's kind of developed that for Mickey 17. I don't know how much non-English language there is in Mickey 17, but I do think it is a little bit of an issue that comes up in Snowpiercer and this film multiple times. And in fact, it is interesting how that is a point of contention in this story. Maybe he saw that in Snowpiercer of like, oh, there's inaccuracies and problems translating, and that's actually a story aspect with Steven Yeun's character, that he is being lazy and improperly translating just for the sake of the company and their mission at ALF, the Animal Liberation Front. And yeah, I enjoyed that element as well, that it's almost like Bong Joon-ho being meta and translation matters, I guess. But we'll talk more about that in the spoiler section of the show. Overall, the structure of Okja, I think the opening gives you so much heart and investment in Okja and Mija's relationship. I would die for Okja and Mija at the start of this film. But by about an hour and a half in, I could feel myself losing interest a little bit, and it's dragging. There's There's great individual scenes and parts in this film that I feel like don't quite come together perfectly. It's a little bit rough when it's cut together. I like the ALF element. I like the Mija and Grandpa element. I love the corporate elements and corporate responsibility discussions that are happening here, but altogether, it does feel a little bit underdeveloped and mismatched. Having said that, overall, I am going to jump into spoilers in a minute because there's a lot to say in spoilers too. I don't know why I put off watching Okja for so long. Maybe it was the whole Netflix element. I just have a tough time trusting Netflix originals for some reason, but I really liked this, and the third act of the film specifically just ruined me. It made me consider my eating habits with meat consumption. Even if it's not a perfect film, it made me think. Like Snowpiercer, it made me think, and it asks a lot of important questions. Okja is a really solid 4 out of 5 stars for me as well. I would consider them both A- movie or A movies. They're not perfect, but they're still really good. Do I prefer Snowpiercer or Okja? It's very apples to oranges, but I will say, I think rewatchability wise, Snowpiercer is way more rewatchable, or I would watch Snowpiercer again tomorrow, but I don't know if I would watch Okja again tomorrow, not just because it's really heavy towards the end, but I just think it does drag its feet a little bit. But let's move into spoilers for Okja. All right, let's get into some spoilers for Okja. So, translation is everything. I already kind of hinted at it with Steven Yeun's character, but at one point he is misinterpreting what Mija is saying because she tells them, I want Okja to come back to the mountains with me back in Korea. The ALF's plan is to take her to New York because she needs to go to this plant where they can prove they're mistreating the animals. And Steven Yeun says, yeah, she's cool with the plan, and it's just translation is everything. So I liked Kay's little character arc that, first of all, Paul Dano just beats the shit out of him. I thought that was a hilarious scene where he just pushes him over and starts kicking him in the ribs over and over again. But Steven Yeun, he's a fun actor, and we're going to talk about him and what else I watched today. I think he just works really well in this, and I'm excited to see him in Mickey 17 as well. I think he's playing a little bit more of a douchebag in that story that's sort of making fun of Mickey the whole time, but he's very well used in this film as a bridge between the two cultures when he is being irresponsible as that bridge just for the sake of ALF. Jay is right that we need to do this all honestly. And I really liked how they established the ALF as heroes and friendly to Okja and got Okja to trust the ALF people as well. She's running through the mall or whatever and gets the ceramic, or is it porcelain, something like that, like a dish, a piece of a broken dish stuck in her foot. And the ALF guy, Jay, played by Paul Dano, pulls it out of her foot just like Mija did at the start of the story with the burr in the forest. And I thought that was just a really good callback to be no, these people are your friends. And then it sets up the whole story that the ALF are going to be good guys and they're trying to truly help the animal. It doesn't set them up to be or they're going to double cross Mija somehow and it turns out they're actually bad people and dangerous. It's no, we have clear heroes and villains in the story. I like it a lot. Maybe they're not a perfect group. What activist group is a perfect group, but still, they're spreading an important message that I thought worked really well throughout the film. One element that I didn't really talk about in non-spoilers, but I really liked her relationship with her grandfather. It's very complicated. He's oh, you're old enough now, you should probably go to town and meet a boy or something like that. And she was under the impression that he was sending the Mirando company, money so they could keep Okja, when instead he wasn't. And he got this gold pig that instead of, actual money being sent to them, he just got this gold thing that they can sell for a bunch of money. And it's very tense. I loved the establishment of their relationship, that she's in the countryside, she loves Okja, they're living together and they're happy together and they miss her parents, but Grandpa is completely blind to the fact of how much she loves Okja and is sort of motivated by money instead. So I wish maybe their relationship was explored a little bit more of when she comes back and how they forgive each other, but I did really like what we got and I thought that was a really well-written relationship. I also really enjoyed what they did with Giancarlo Esposito as Frank. He's more loyal to the company than to people, putting Nancy on speakerphone and sliding her slowly across the table so she could hear her twin sister. Thought that was a really good story beat that worked well for me of oh, this guy is clearly not loyal to anyone and he just cares about the bottom line, and if he sees someone failing as a leader, he'll sell them out immediately. And for Mirando and the Mirandos in general, that company, it's not about messaging or ethics in public. They don't actually care about corporate responsibility. It's about the bottom line, which, let's be real, that's how it is in real life as well. It's not about actually caring about real life and resources and stuff like that, like Coca-Cola doing a full AI commercial commercial where they're showing AI polar bears, which is ironic because of the environmental impacts of AI. So weirdly enough, I think the Mirando Corporation is a really well-written aspect, almost a character in this story, with like the whole experiment being a sham, which sort of ruined me at the end of the film. The fact that they've been growing, apparently 26 super pigs or whatever across the world, when in fact they have a farm with hundreds of them that they are slaughtering for meat production. The end of the movie just tore me apart. I was watching it with my dog in my lap, and I was so close to just like tearing up and be like, damn, maybe I'll just never eat meat again, because it is truly an awful thing to watch. Like, I get some people can appreciate where their meat comes from, and it's a good part of the cycle of life to understand, but my God, the inhumanity and stuff is just like terrifying. But the whole farm part worked super well at the end, with Jay and Kay coming to the rescue to help Mija, and them even being okay to get arrested and help her for the sake of Okja's safety. I thought that just all worked really well, like this redemption team up in the end, even if it was a little bit rough before that with like the New York City, the parade, because I do think the parade scenes and the lead up to the slaughterhouse were kind of losing our story of like, who are we meant to root for here? We don't really have a lot of emotional stakes going into this, because we keep seeing her reunited with Okja and not reunited with Okja, and it's like, I don't know, it just feels like they're still together, and it's very sad, and it's not Okja or it is Okja. I don't know. It felt very messy and unbalanced going into the slaughterhouse, but then it really brings it home at the end for me. I feel like it won me over in the end because of the messaging and how terrible it is. And it is interesting to read that both writers, Bong Joon-ho and Jon Ronson, sort of went vegan during the shoot when they visited slaughterhouses to understand what they were writing about. So it's not just, messaging being shared publicly. I think actually the creators of the film did care about what they were talking about. Just, you can feel how much care there is and attention paid to the questions they're asking. And same with Snowpiercer. Like, you can tell this is a very thought out thing that is questioning the hierarchies that we live in every day, the structures of our world, and how we just, we live on capitalism and the bottom line, all that stuff. And I don't know, I think Bong Joon-ho has a lot of stuff to say in his projects, and I'm looking forward to Mickey 17 to talk about how expendable humans are to leaders. And like Parasite, it's kind of the perfect film to come out in Trump era world that we're living in. These bad guys, they just seem all humans as expendable life that they can waste for their power and their bottom lines. But look, Okja was a very heartfelt and moving story that I enjoyed a lot, and I would recommend both films so much. Okja is still a really enjoyable film that has a lot to say and a lot to think about. I was very happy with the ending. The little piglet was so cute that they saved her and brought her home with Okja. And I actually really like the post-credit scene in this film where Jay and Kay come out of prison, or maybe just Jay, and they show that, these activists like the ALF, they'll go to jail, and as soon as they get out and they're on the bus together, they put their balaclavas back on and go right back to work. Really brilliant. But I think that's going to do it for the Snowpiercer and Okja section of the show. Before we get into what else I watched, that was a lot of fun. And like I said, I'm looking forward to Mickey 17 a lot. I think I'm going to go back and watch Memories of Murder, another Bong Joon-ho film that's in Korean, however. But let's move into what else I watched. All right, what else I watched? A little bit of a lighter week because I was working on the YouTube video Monday to Wednesday, and then Thursday I worked the election for 14 hours, so it was kind of a jam-packed week, but still, I got 2 movies to talk about and 7 shows. Let's start with the TV shows, of course. So, Invincible Season 3 came out this week, and goddamn, I love it. I actually think it is a fantastic season of television. I'm liking it better than Season 2 already. I've watched the first 3 episodes. I think Mark and Oliver's relationship as brothers is so fascinating, and trying to hold back Oliver because he's so much like his dad, but also he's developing way faster than Mark did at his age. So I think all of that is just golden. Invincible is such a good show. I mean, Season 1, I remember binge watching Season 1 and being like, this show is insane. Season 2, like I spoke about on the podcast last year, I hated the mid-season break and it felt very disruptive to the flow of the story. But Season 3, if you haven't checked it out yet and you are an Invincible fan, go and watch it. Next up, the SAG Awards. Watched it live on Netflix last weekend. Very surprising. Demi Moore and Timothée Chalamet both winning really made me have some hopes for the Oscars. Like, I wouldn't hate Adrian Brody and Mikey Madison winning, but I would love Timmy and Demi Moore to take home the Best Actor awards. But overall, the SAG Awards were actually really enjoyable. I think my highlight of the night was Timothée Chalamet's speech. God damn, I don't get how people could hate on that. It's just an artist saying that they want to be a great artist and they're inspired by everyone in the room. I really liked Demi Moore's speech as well, and Jane Fonda, just amazing, even though she kept messing around with the mic. It was so hard to hear her, but fantastic. I'm very excited for the Oscars tomorrow. Then we have White Lotus Season 3, Episode 2, another fantastic episode. I don't know what is going on with the kids of that rich family, but what a creepy season we are having. All of the, the women hating each other, the friend group, the three of them is so messy. Walton Goggins and Amy Lou Woods from Sex Education. I love their dynamic with Greg. I'm loving Season 3, but something that did restart this week, Survivor Season 48. Episode title was The Get to Know You Game, and dear God, it was a riveting start to the season. I will say, I kind of like all the cast members. I don't think there's really anyone that I disliked getting through the first episode. Like, everyone is pretty likable, and that's what made it hard to root against people. They did cut out one guy dislocating his shoulder and almost getting med evac'd, which I thought was interesting that they cut that for time, because the edit made him look a little goofy and kind of wimpy, and then he was like, oh, I don't know if I'm strong enough to go on the journey after. I think they should have probably kept that in to give the audience a little more context of oh, he was really in pain and the doctor had to look at him after. But there is one contestant, her name is Sai, and my God, she was hitting the beach running. She was looking for an idol first 20 minutes, telling everyone, guys, let's start making alliances. Okay, the four of us are going to work together. And they hadn't even got their shelter up yet. And Steph, the contestant that was voted out this week, was like, oh, I'm going to run slow and steady. And I don't know, I think they made a real mistake sending her home. And weirdly enough, outside of the game, in her exit interview, she said the tribes are extremely uneven. And I was surprised when we hit the beach how I think she said we felt like the weakest tribe. And it's so true watching that. Green is going to be a disaster tribe. The tribes are so uneven. I think purple is going to dominate every challenge, and it's just going to be insane that we won't see them at tribal till the merge. Green is going to be the first out. I think they might just go every tribal for the rest until we get down to 2 tribes maybe. But overall, a very good premiere, and I'm very excited. And in fact, it was such a good premiere that we went back and watched Season 1, Episodes 3 and 4 last night with Stacy and Ramona going home. My God, Jeff Probst is so funny in the first season, how weirdly I don't know, it's all just so casual because we're so used to him saying the same things every season, knowing the exact things that are going to be said in every situation, tribe is spoken, once the votes are read, all that stuff. But the first season, he's kind of just winging it, and he's wearing the goofiest sunglasses and Y2K gear that is just hilarious to see. But I am very much liking Season 1, and Episode 3 and 4, it feels like, oh, we're actually starting to see Survivor, the game itself, be established. Richard being like, oh yeah, I want to make an alliance. Hearing the word alliance for the first time in Survivor, so strange. Then for TV shows, we end on Severance Episode 7, Chikai Bardo, craziest episode of the series. The fact it was the director's, I can't remember her name right now and I didn't write it down. It was her directing debut, and that was, I'm going to say, Episode 7 was the best episode of the series. Broke my heart, the flashing back and forth. I also think we got so many answers about the company itself. Here's a little theory that I think I'll put in my review that I'm going to put out on Tuesday. I think Irving, outside of Lumen, his outie, is actually also severed. I think there was an original Irving who became severed, and then they actually severed his innie, and that's why he's having the visions of the elevator, because he was trapped on that floor. I think Irving is a triple innie, and we haven't seen it explained how he knows that elevator yet, and that's why I think it was a sever inside of a sever. But Episode 7 was mind-boggling. It's going to win every Emmy, every Golden Globe it can, because it was one of the best episodes of television I've probably ever seen. And I feel like we're saying that every week with Severance. But let's move into movies. I got 2 to talk about for you this week. Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End from 2007. It came out a year after the second one. I think even if the story is a lot weaker than the first and second one, the action in At World's End is phenomenal. The whole whirlpool with 2 ships was just so much fun, and I love that it goes on for 30 or 40 minutes of the movie, but also just every action set piece in World's End feels like it's stepping it up from the previous ones. The story was a little lackluster, and kind of everything from the second movie is solved in the first 40 minutes maybe, but Pirates 3, even if it's a worse movie and it's almost 3 hours, way too long, there's so much that you could have cut out of it. If you want a good epic action pirate movie, World's End is probably the best action, I would say, of the 3 so far. Even the first one I think is a lot of fun with the use of sunlight, moonlight, and the skeletons and stuff like that, but just the use of ships and the grand epicness of the third one was so much fun. So I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it a lot. Action wise, it was just, the story was really missing for me. And it was just funny how Will Turner, he sacrifices himself to be the captain of the Dutchman, and then all of a sudden he has so much eyeliner on and he's got like a Zorro bandana. I thought that was so goofy, but it was hilarious. I laughed pretty hard when he popped up on screen. Okay, then weirdly enough, last night we rewatched Barbie. I haven't seen it since it came out, and I said in my Letterboxd review, it is really strange when you watch like a cultural phenomenon or you look at a trend or something like that outside of the cultural movement. Now that, like, you know, Barbenheimer was massive and I loved both movies when they came out. I've rewatched Oppenheimer I think twice or one time, twice since it came out, and I loved it just as much the second time. Whereas I rewatched Barbie and there was just a lot of glaring issues that I was like, oh, I didn't even notice that the first time, or I was so caught up in maybe the haze of the cultural moment that I didn't see the flaws of the story. Because tonally, my God, it's like whiplash. So it feels very restricting on Greta Gerwig, and it feels like one big commercial. It's very Mattel, like hovering over, and there's like a shadow over Greta Gerwig. And it was fascinating going back and reading people who gave it a mixed review like I gave it last night, that when they originally watched it in 2023 and why they had issues with it at first, and just how I was like, God damn, they're right. How did I not see that the first time? But I feel like we all kind of get caught up in cultural movements or, you know, what's popular, and we want to be like joining everyone and saying how fun something is. But then you rewatch it outside of the cultural movement and you're like, oh, it's not as amazing as I thought it was. Whereas it was actually interesting. My girlfriend rewatching it, she liked it even more the second time, whereas I was the opposite. I liked it a little bit less. When I first watched it, I gave it a 4.5 stars versus this time I gave it 3.5 because it just feels like, first of all, it's way too short. Every character is kind of underwritten for me. Tonally, it's just all over the place. And that car commercial for the Chevys is so noticeable throughout on multiple occasions. Just, I don't know. Having said that though, Margot Robbie, America Ferrera, and Ryan Gosling are so good. Like the trio, they all should have had Oscar nominations, and they're just as good on the second watch. But I think the story is really lackluster. But Pirates of the Caribbean, 3 stars. Barbie, 3.5 stars. All the TV shows I watched were just fantastic. This weekend, I'm going to watch 12 Angry Men, the Oscars. I'm going to read Captain America, Winter Soldier. And yeah, I think that'll do it for what else I watched. And I think that's going to do it for episode 59, Watcher Watchback, Snowpiercer and Okja. That was a lot of fun. I do feel like I had a lot more to say about both of them, but I would urge you, even before Mickey 17 or after, go back and watch Bong Joon-ho's other English films because they're a lot of fun. I actually enjoyed everything I watched this week. Like both movies, I still had a lot of fun watching Pirates and Barbie. All the TV shows this week were incredible. So it's been a very positive week of watching stuff and reading stuff. So I'm excited for next week. Mickey 17, but of course, as always, please rate and review the show 5 stars on all of your streaming platforms, wherever you get your great podcasts like Watcher of All Things, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Acast. We are, of course, an Acast produced show. If you're on the YouTube channel where I just posted my Oscar hopes and prediction video, please go check that out as well. But leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below on this episode. Do you prefer Snowpiercer? Do you prefer Okja? Do you prefer his non-English films like Parasite? Honestly, I prefer Parasite over either of these, of course, because Parasite is like lightning in a bottle, but I'm very excited for Mickey 17. Are you excited for Mickey 17? Let me know. You can also email the show, watcherofallthings@gmail.com, or find me on social media. Instagram and Threads are at Watcher of All Things, with the TikTok being watcher.of.all.things. My Letterboxd account is KikiJ70. That's my personal Letterboxd account, KIKIJ70. Follow me on Letterboxd. Drop a comment under one of my reviews that you found me through the show, and I will follow you back. Let's build a little community. Next week, Mickey 17, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited to talk about that, but I think that's going to do it for now. Thank you all so much for listening. Stay warm. It is freezing here in Ontario, and I will see you in the next one.